Hey guys, it's Nadia from LiaDia Designs and I'm back with another tutorial. Today I'm doing something that I'm actually really excited about and I've already kind of gotten started here. So I poured my resin into these coaster molds and I had just pigmented them with some mica powder and then I let it sit. It's been about 20 minutes or so now and I'm using my counterculture thin viscosity resin and it's been about 20 minutes and as you can see it's quite thick. So now is the perfect time to add in some swirls if that's something that you'd like to do with your resin in terms of having a bit of detail and texture on the background of your coasters. So this is, like I said, it will vary according to your resin. The resin I'm using usually starts to really cure or really start to harden within about 30 minutes. So around the 20-minute mark is a good place to do this. And again, you decide just use a quick torch on that just to get rid of any extra bubbles, but make sure you stay very far away from the edges of your coaster molds if you're going to do that. So we are going to let this sit and cure overnight, and then in the morning we'll be back to start our design. Alright, so it's the next morning and we're ready to add our design, and today I'm using a washable marker on the resin to draw out the design. I know if you've been following me for a little while, you'll know that whenever I have clear designs, that sometimes I'll just put a sketch underneath the mold so that I can just do a trace. But when I have an opaque color like this, if I'm not sure about what the design is, or if I'm just trying to figure it out, in this case is the brand new design that I'm working on, I'll actually sketch it out with a washable marker and then I can go over that with my paint to trace over it and then just kind of wash out the rest of any leftover marker that's left after the fact. So today I am creating a lotus design, but this is in an Egyptian style and it's been something that I've been wanting to do for a little while. And I just love the simplicity of this design. Like it's just some really basic shapes. And yeah, so I'm just going to go in and just kind of draw that out on both of my coasters. And I'm using my Serenade Relief to, trace over those lines. So, and I'm not going to be overly worried again about the fact that I'm covering the marker. It's going to be hidden under the paint, and anything that's left over I can just go in and just clear away with some water or some isopropyl alcohol once the paint has dried. So we'll just go over our lines here. And I've had a lot of requests for a video on some alternatives to this Pebeo paint that I'm using. And actually that video is coming out very soon. It's actually going to be the next video that comes out after this one. So depending on when you watch this, just look for the next video after this one and it will be some alternatives. It's kind of a tips and tricks video, some alternatives that I've tested out for this paint here. So that is coming out very shortly. So we'll just finish up our lines here. And again, it does take practice to get the consistency right on how much pressure to use and to not, obviously get any kind of shaky lines. It does take quite a bit of practice. So we will finish that up and we're going to let that dry. But while we're waiting, I'm actually going to just go ahead and add in some shells around the edges. And these shells are just like broken seashells, and they have been tinted in a turquoise or an aqua color. So I'm going to use my DuraClear varnish here to paint the edges of the coaster mold. And again, the paint in the middle here is wet. If you're not comfortable doing this while the paint is wet, then you can definitely wait till the paint is dry and then go in with this step afterwards. But I'm trying to just kind of maximize my time here. So I'm going to maximize the efficiency of my time here. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in the shells. And I'm using the DuraClear varnish as a kind of a glue. So we know it dries clear. So for me, it's a safe way of just adding these pieces, knowing that the glue is not going to show once it dries. So we'll go into a quick time lapse, get those shells in, and then I'll see you. Then we'll actually leave this to dry. It's going to be a couple hours and we'll be back to add color. Okay, so we're back and our paint and shells are now dry. And we're going to be using a specialty paint called Pebeo Prismé Fantasy. You may have seen this in a previous video when I made a geode, but you can see here that it has a really cool effect to it when it dries. It kind of creates this, these little bubbles or like cells in the paint. Now the paint that I have is older. It's a few years old, so it's not as consistent anymore in terms of how many bubbles show up or if any at all show up. I didn't mind it for this particular piece because it's an Egyptian style. Um, I was okay with it being a little bit inconsistent because it kind of adds to kind of like an aged look to the paint. But the new paints, like if you bought them fresh, they would all have quite a bit of the bubbles in them in the cells. So to start, what we'll need to do is we need to stir the paint because whatever the medium is that they use to create the cells, we just want to make sure it's mixed in properly. Otherwise we won't get any cells. So I wanted to make sure I mixed it first, and then we can go ahead and just start adding it within our lines here. Now for this type of paint, you want to add it on a little bit thicker than normal, just because you want to give it a little bit of depth so that we can get those cells to show up if they're going to show up. Again, my paint is a little bit older, so it's not going to show up everywhere. It's not going to be a consistent cell pattern, but again, I think that worked really well for this particular style in the Egyptian look that I'm going for. So we're going to go ahead into another time lapse. Going to add in all the colors, and then I will show you what it looks like when it's all done. So here we are. Here's the large tray that I did earlier, and also the two coasters that match. And as you can see that the cells, on the coasters, they haven't started forming yet because I just finished those. But on the tray, you can see that some areas have it and some areas don't. I think that looks pretty neat. So anyways, we will leave these to dry about 12 hours, and then we're ready to top coat. Okay, so we're ready to start just adding our top coat of resin to the piece. And the first thing I want to do is I want to put resin along the edge where we have these shells, just because there are going to be a little bit of gaps there, and we want to make sure we capture those gaps before we pour the rest. And if you just pour it in the middle, it may not reach the edges. So I just want to always start with the edges first on this type of top coat. And we'll do the same on the coasters. And once we finish pouring our resin on all the pieces, then we will go in with our heat gun and just get rid of any bubbles that there are. And then we'll let that cure overnight and unmold it in the morning. All right, we're ready to unmold, and go ahead and take these out. So you'll see that there's a couple little bubbles that did end up showing up on here, and I'm okay with that because I'm going to be adding a second top coat or a dome coat to these pieces. So I wasn't too concerned about any little extra bubbles that were going to show up. So we'll carve those out, and then we'll get ready for that. But we'll go ahead and finish unmolding the tray as well. And I really like how this piece looks with the contrast of the dark background and the colors, the brighter colors in the design. All right, so we're going to go through the process of how to do the top coat, the second top coat, or a dome coat. And as you can see, I've already carved out with my blade where the bubbles were, and I didn't just carve out the exact area of the bubble. I actually carved out a little bit of a larger area so that it just gives the resin more of a place to kind of settle in. And the one thing I'm going to do as well is, as you can see here, there's that meniscus layer that's around the edge. So that's where the resin kind of creeps up when you pour inside of a mold, kind of creeps up the sides a bit and gives you a bit of an edge. Now, sometimes that's fine. And when you want to do your top coat, that's something that you actually can use in your favor to kind of hold the top layer of resin within um, the top, and so that it doesn't drip down the sides. But in this case, I actually want the resin to drip down the sides. I want to seal off the edges on the sides of this piece as well to kind of give it a more rounded edge. So I'm going to be going in and carving off that meniscus layer to kind of give us a beveled edge. And a couple tools that I showed there, whether it's the knife or whether it's the deburring tool, whatever you want to use to kind of, or if you want to sand it with your Dremel, whatever you want to do to kind of get that edge off, and then it'll allow us a nice area so that when we pour the resin on top, it'll actually flow down the sides and it'll give us a nice rounded corner. Okay, so once we've trimmed our edges, now we can go ahead and add our liquid latex to the bottom of the piece. And this is the one I use, but I don't think it really matters for terms of brand or type. I think as long as it's a liquid latex, you're probably fine. And I just use a regular paintbrush here. This is one that I reuse often for painting the liquid latex on the back of my pieces. You can just clean it afterwards. So just go ahead and brush it straight on. It may pull away from the edges of your piece a little bit, but just go back over it a couple times and it will eventually catch. So we'll just go ahead, and we want to put a decent layer of it on here just because we do want it to protect from the drips that are going to happen after we pour our resin over the sides, because we are going to be doing that intentionally this time. So once we've done that, then we just have to leave it for about an hour or so until it's completely clear and we're ready to add our resin on top. Okay, so we're ready to add our second top coat, and I'm going to go around the edges first because I, again, want to make sure that I'm coating the edges, especially because we are wanting to get the drips on the side this time, because I do want to have the resin, you know, go over the edges and just kind of seal off any areas that might have been missed. So I don't always do this. This is kind of something I just do occasionally, depending on the look that I'm going for, if I want a rounded edge or not. So again, we'll just go ahead and do that around the edges, and then we'll fill in the middle, and then we'll go over this with our torch, get rid of any bubbles, and we'll leave it to cure overnight. All right, so it's the next morning and we're ready to remove our liquid latex. And as you can see, it comes off very easily and it pulls off the drips with it as well. So we'll just go around and remove that from the piece. You can use a knife if you prefer for this, just to kind of get under those drips, but I'm used to using my nails, which I know is not the best thing, but it works for me. So okay, so we've done that for all of our pieces in the back of our tray, and everything's done. And as you can see, the edges have a nice shiny look to them with that resin going over the sides. I also wanted to mention that with all the drips that were falling onto the mat, I actually pick those up with my spatula, and I make other pieces with them. So I make these little pieces here. I just take the extra drippings and I put them in another mold. So I have this little heart one, which is part of a confectionery mold that I have. And then I also have a tea light holder in this Lotus shape that I pour into as well. It just kind of saves all that excess and we don't feel like we're wasting our resin. And here we go with our final pieces. I really like how these look with the more simple design. I really like the style. It's a bit different for me, but I love the style. I love the texture of the paints and the shells. It kind of gives a mosaic, older style kind of look. And even the swirls and the contrast of the background, it all just works so well together. I'm really happy with how this turned out. And I hope you guys liked it too. If you did, don't forget to leave me a comment in the comment section, and like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.